Welcome to Council Chambers. Tonight we are holding a public hearing on Tuesday, July 19th, 2022 to consider the estimated revenues for fiscal year 2023. A copy of the proposed revenue estimates are on file in the City Auditor's Office for public inspection during regular business hours. Does anybody wish to address council on this matter? Hearing none, I will adjourn the public hearing at 6:56 p.m. All in favor? Any opposed? We are adjourned. Good evening and welcome to the regular session of Findlay City Council on July 19th, 2022. We will start this evening's meeting with the roll call.
Mr. Bowman?
Here.
Mr. Greeno?
Here.
Mr. Hellman?
Here.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Here.
Mr. Palmer?
Here.
Mr. Russell?
Here.
Mr. Slough? Ms. Warnicki?
Here.
Mr. Wopser?
Present.
Mr. Slough contacted me prior to tonight's meeting. He is out of town and would entertain a motion on Mr. Hellman to excuse.
So moved.
Second, Mr. Greeno. All those in favor of excusing Mr. Slough say aye. Any opposed, nay. He is excused. Would you please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, followed by a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I will entertain a motion to accept the previous city council minutes. Mr. Hellman, second. Mr. Palmer, discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of accepting the previous city council minutes say aye. Any opposed, nay. They are a matter of record. Mr. Russell, do we have any add-ons, replacements, or removals from tonight's agenda?
Yes, sir. We have an add-on, a letter from Auditor Stasiak concerning revenue estimates for fiscal year 2023, and would move that be added to reports of municipal officers and municipal departments, and also replacement for ordinance 2022-071, a change of a word from just some wording describing the accounts, and move that be replaced.
Second, Mr. Baumann. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adding the items to tonight's agenda say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay. They are added. We have no proclamations. We have no recognition or retirement resolutions. We do have one petition.
An alley vacation request for a portion of South Blanchard Street from a Michael Stoner to vacate the east-west alley from South Blanchard Street to Graceland Avenue, bounded between lots 5391 and 5392 in the Leisure Addition.
Any questions or comments? This matter will be referred to the City Planning Commission and the Planning and Zoning Committee. We have no oral communications. We have one written communication.
A letter from Findlay Hancock County, the Community Foundation Chief Community Engagement Officer Kimberly Bash regarding the Martin Luther King mural grant.
Questions or comments? Mr. Russell.
Mayor, is that for the? Is that kind of in response to the one gal who contacted us about painting under the bridge and all that?
So kind of. So we had an individual, probably 2 months ago or so, reach out regarding wanting to do a mural underneath one of our bridges, which spurred a discussion. Doing murals throughout the community in kind of controlled fashion is something that I am interested in doing, and recently found that we had a fund at the Community Foundation for community improvement, that this would be an allowable, murals would be an allowable use of funds. So not a large balance, I think it's right around $8,000, but it kind of spurred me to look at where we could do some projects. And one area that had been discussed in the community was under the MLK overpass, where the bike path kind of goes along that area, and in an area where we can see it from East Main Cross. When you're driving down the road, you would look over and see the stanchion. It's not underneath the bridge, it's actually on the leg of the bridge that would be proposed, and I do have an example, though I'm not quite ready to show it to the public because I want to announce it. I tried to call you today, Denise, to tell you this. I'll let you see it, but we'll work on it this week. But we have an artist who I reached out to and is interested in painting it's like over 1,000 square feet mural that would commemorate Dr. King, and then we would work with the public to vote on a quote that would be included. And I think it'd be a really cool way to spruce up the path, bring some light and art into an area that many people use but is not exactly pretty, and also adjacent to an area where we're going to be doing significant improvements with the downtown recreation area. So I had bounced this idea off of Brian Treese with the Community Foundation, and he said that sounds exactly like something we would like to be a part of, and it is a significant cost. I would expect the ending cost will be about $20,000 to $25,000, and so they committed $15,000. So we did not apply for this. I spoke with them, and then a couple days later they called and said, hey, we want to give you the money, and they sent me the forms, which is why I then shared it with you all. So it would be a pretty big project, but I think it would be really neat and something that I'd like to roll out to the public to be involved with. I know the Black Heritage Library and Multicultural Center is interested in helping facilitate kind of narrowing down a couple of the quotes that we would put out for the public. But it does feed into the fact that I think there's a lot of opportunities in areas where we could spruce it up, bring some light and art into our community. And this is separate, but it's kind of the kickoff to what I see as a really cool program.
Mr. Wobser.
Mayor, the two things. So you said we have 8,000 put away. So we're a total of 23 with this grant.
Right. So right now, there's a couple, and I knew you guys were going to bring this up. So I did talk to the artist because we decreased the cost a little bit. So this would be something that I probably will be coming back to you all in a couple of months. I'm going to look at, there may be some funding in my budget to put towards this. I may come back to you, but I also think this is an opportunity where we may try to get some other organizations in the community to put some funds towards this project to kind of kick it off. But there is the possibility that I would request some additional funds from you all. I wouldn't expect that to exceed $10,000.
And are we talking about the part of Martin Luther King overpass that is behind LaRich's property there?
Can pass this.
We have
I'll pass.
visuals.
We have a couple of visuals.
Oh, she's bringing.
So, yes, it is. It is the one that when you are driving on East Main Cross by LaRich, you look over to your left and you can see it. It's an inner area where you previously really couldn't see from the roadway, but we've cleaned out a lot of the brush to kind of clean up that hillside. And it's right along the walking path back there. The graffiti on that image would be removed. It would all be painted over. It just was a little more challenging for her to kind of clean it all before she did her design on it. So that graffiti would be removed.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you, Mayor.
Yeah.
Letter to be filed. Reports of officers and departments.
Findlay Police Departmental Activities Report for June 2022.
Questions or comments? Report to be filed.
Precipitation and reservoir levels report for the second quarter of April through June of 2022.
Questions or comments? Report to be filed.
Findlay Municipal Court Activities Report for June 2022.
Questions or comments? Report to be filed.
City Planning Commission Staff Report for July 14th, 2022.
Questions or comments? Report to be filed.
A letter from Administrative and Presiding Judge of Findlay Municipal Court, Stephanie Bishop, regarding Community Alternative Sentencing Center, number 319-24700.
Questions or comments? Letter to be filed.
A letter from City Engineer Kalb regarding AIP 33 North Apron Rehab Construction, project number 35224-000.
Questions or comments? Letter to be filed.
A letter from City Engineer Kalb regarding Findlay Airport, if I can say concierge, what's it? Concierge? Vehicle.
Questions or comments?
Question.
Mr. Wobser?
Jeremy, on this one, so we originally were going to buy a pickup truck that I guess at that point you thought we needed to replace a pickup truck, but we're not going to replace that truck, so it still has viable life in it.
Yeah,
And we're
so,
going to replace
with
an SUV of some sort.
Yep. So with the kind of change from the airport directors and kind of direction that talking with administration and also director on where it needs to go and what they see, the truck still has life to it and is not a huge need. But the concierge vehicle right now is a 2005 Grand Prix, has leaking seals, oil leaks, brake issues. A lot of the people that use that, they come in groups of 4 or 5, so trying to squeeze in there is not the best thing to do. So that's what they're looking for, a mid-size SUV such as an Explorer or something like that.
So I'm going to surmise that at some point in time, you're going to come back for a truck.
At some point in time, but I wouldn't say anytime soon. Not this year.
So that truck was really in better shape than we expected. I guess I'm a little concerned. You know, we were told that you needed a truck, but now we don't need a truck. But it sounds like the Grand Prix, beautiful vehicle
Yeah,
that
Pontiac.
it is, needs to be replaced. I'm not disagreeing with the fact that it needs to be replaced. The fact that we approved a truck that we thought needed replaced, and it really doesn't.
Yeah, just after looking into it and really seeing what the operational needs are through there, the truck still has life. It is still in good working shape. You know, it was at the point where it didn't want to just upgrade a truck because the timing or anything like that, but it's still in good working shape, and they can still use it for plowing and their needs through there. But with the operational needs, the Grand Prix is needing replaced because that is used daily.
Any
Very
other
good.
questions or comments? Letter to be filed.
Letter from City Engineer Calb regarding regarding Airport Terminal Building move and rehab of 35222-100.
Questions or comments? Mr. Russell.
Just, you should sit in the front corner for the next little bit. So,
Yeah.
you would recommend that this be passed tonight. What's the, where's the urgency, or where are we with the terminal move?
So the rehab part of it, rehabilitation
This is the
is moving over
Okay.
to the Terry building. They are moving along fairly well with that. They're working on the floors and ceilings right now. So August 1st is when they're shooting to move into that new building. With the lead time and stuff for furniture and stuff, they're looking at 10 weeks on that. So that's why we're wanting to get moving on that as soon as possible. So that way we can get it ordered and we're not having to be too long with older furniture that really doesn't work in that area.
Other questions or comments? Ms. Mayor.
And one of the factors with the move, obviously, it'll be in usable condition before we move them into that building, but ODOT is also moving into the old terminal building. If you recall, we've signed an agreement with them to be leasing that, so they will be operational in August.
Any other questions or comments? Letter to be filed.
Letter from City Engineer Calb regarding the Han Interstate and FHS Trails PID 115232 for 32821-400.
Questions or comments? Letter to be filed.
Letter from City Engineer Calb regarding Rector Avenue Waterline Replacement, number 357-10100.
Questions or comments? Mr. Russell.
Yeah, Jeremy, I was a little surprised that there wasn't a desire to move this one along. I thought we were usually want to be pretty aggressive on, especially waterline projects. Where are we? Do we have not contractors aren't ready to go until mid-August, or what's the?
Yeah, the contractor is not fully ready to go yet. So this is actually a different kind of project than a normal replacement. It's actually going to be a liner through there because we don't have any room to put a new water line with the clearances we have to have with the sewer. So this is going to be a liner, so it's a totally different process where we're only opening up a 5x6 hole every 500 feet. But why I didn't have this as a push is just because the contractor is not fully ready. So I figure it can go through its proper channels.
Have we lined water lines before, or is this I don't recall that we've.
This is the first time for Findlay, but it's not the first time for anyone in the area. We've been in communication with Lima does it, Youngstown, Cleveland, a lot of those areas. But it's always been out there, but it's really starting to come around to itself right now. But this is the first one we're going to try within Findlay.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Letter to be filed.
Letter from City Engineer Calb regarding Water Pollution Control Clarifier Rehab 3, 4, and 5, project number 356-01300.
Questions or comments? Letter to be filed.
Summary financial reports as of June 30th, 2022.
Questions or comments? Report to be filed.
Letter from City Engineer Calb regarding 2022 GIS system functionality growth number 319-22200.
Questions or comments? Mr. Wobser.
Jeremy, was this in our original capital plan or expense plan for this year?
Yeah, it was on the capital plan.
Okay, so this is just moving the money around that we expected to spend.
Yep, just appropriating the money, and that way we can get the consultant rolling on it.
Understood. Thank you.
Any additional questions or comments? Letter to be filed.
Letter from Chief of Police Ring regarding Ohio Attorney General Drug Response Team DART grant program.
Questions or comments? Letter to be filed.
A letter from Service Safety Director Martin regarding response to Centurion Technologies Incorporated Craig S. Kuchball's letter.
Questions or comments? Mr. Wobser.
Per the request of Mr. Kuchbaugh, I'd ask that this letter be read into the minutes.
Which letter?
So, yeah, there's two letters.
Well, actually, both letters have been asked to be read, both Safety Service Director Martin's letter and Mr. Kuchbaugh's letter. Both of them been asked to be read.
Second, Mr. Palmer. All those in favor of having both letters read into the record, say aye. Any opposed? Please read both letters.
Do you want me to start with Mr. Kuchball's? That way we know the response. Okay. This one is from Mr. Kuchball. I am writing to express my concerns about a bid process that took place last month for lighting in the Findlay Municipal Building. My concern is that the bid process was not properly conducted as to give each participating vendor a fair and equal opportunity. First, please note that the bidding for this project was not made public. Had I not caught wind of the project from a friend and then called to inquire about details, my company, nor any other companies, could have been involved in the bid. I find this highly unusual and not representative of conducting public business properly. After contacting Service Safety Director Rob Martin, I was asked to be involved in the bid with Harley Heldman at the municipal building. After talking with Harley, it was very apparent to me that he was not going to bid the job and was going to give the job to Bowman Electric, as he has done with other projects previously. I then called Rob Martin multiple times, leaving messages each time without a single return call. I called Councilman Wobser and informed him of Rob's lack of response and the Harley's attempt to go around the building requirements of the state of Ohio. It was my understanding that Mr. Wobser talked with Rob, but nothing changed. There was no bid sheet put out with objectives for the project, and therefore it was a free-for-all on the bidding. When I asked Mr. Hellman for the objectives of the project, for instance, is the project about energy savings or just a lighting fixture upgrade, the response I received was that he was upset I went around him and to bring samples in if I wanted to. End of conversation. As you know, in the end, Mr. Hellman made sure the Bowman got the job. As a citizen of Findlay, I am appalled by Mr. Martin's blatant disregard of bidding policy and lack of understanding of the city resources. I understand that Mr. Martin is relatively new to his position as Safety Service Director. However, allowing the very important public bidding process to be so blatantly mangled is frustrating at best and certainly does not inspire trust in our local government. It is my hope that the bid process will be properly conducted in the future. Respectfully submitted, Craig Kuchball.
So that was Mr. Kuchbaugh's letter, and so we will now read Mr. Martin's response.
I am writing you to share the facts regarding the process the city followed while preparing for the municipal building lighting project. I felt necessary to write a response to Mr. Kuchball's letter that misrepresents the process followed and the intent that he perceives to be true based on the letter he requested to be read at council. The city budgeted for a lighting project in the municipal building in 2022. Based on the budget and the scope of the project, a decision was made to focus on hallways and stairwells in 2022, replacing light fixtures with LED. Understanding that this project was budgeted for $50,000 and the scope of work being done, we were comfortable with this project not exceeding the budget. Per section 735.05 of the Ohio Revised Code, the Director of Public Service may make any contract, purchase supplies or material, or provide labor for any work under the supervision of the Department of Public Service involving not more than $50,000. In other words, there was no formal bid process due to the fact it is not required in this situation. Understanding this, I still wanted to have a competitive process, so I requested our facility manager to reach out to 3 local vendors that perform such work to provide quotes. Each vendor walked the building with our facility manager to discuss the scope of the project while providing the opportunity to ask questions. Each vendor then installed their preferred product based on our descriptions of the project so that we were able to visualize the product and choose accordingly. When I reviewed the quotes, the lowest quote was not given by Mr. Coochball's organization, therefore they were not chosen, which is when he began to accuse us of not following the bid process and of favoritism to a specific vendor. He made accusations about the process and the materials being less than efficient than what is currently installed, which is simply not true. He made attempts to contact me, which I did return his call once. I had facts around the efficiency of materials chosen to be installed. I explained this entire process to him, but unfortunately he drew his own conclusion with a false narrative.
Questions or comments? Mr. Wobser?
Rob, thanks for your response to Mr. Kuchbau's letter. And I think it's important to point out what you stated in your 3rd paragraph, which was we didn't do anything wrong. The administration and Mr. Harley Heldman, who reports to you, did not do anything wrong because the bid was ultimately below $50,000, correct?
Correct.
How much was the overall cost of the project?
Approximately $18,000.
Okay. One question I had was, did all 3 vendors get to bid on the same light fixture?
It was a quote, and it wasn't a bid, just to be clear. I want to make sure we don't mix those words up.
So there wasn't really a bidding
There was
process
not a bid.
done?
So, yes, you're correct. It was quotes. We have, in the past, have bought light bulbs from Centurion. And this came about because we were buying light bulbs, and a call was made to Mr. Coochball. And the order that was typically done, Harley said, I don't need as many light bulbs as I have in the past because we're going to be doing an LED project. Right. And then that proceeded to have the conversations about getting quotes. So a vendor that Mr. Coochball uses to install products is a vendor that we use on other miscellaneous projects in this building. When it was found out that Mr. Coochball would use that other vendor to install this product, you realize that you could potentially eliminate the middleman in this. So let's get a quote from both and compare them to see who would be more economic for us to get this job done. And that's how this all proceeded. So there was no ill intent. There was very much transparency with all contractors involved. And we ended up going with the product that we all liked, because as you know, you go to pick out light bulbs, they all have different lumens, different lighting. We wanted to make sure that we liked what we were using in this building and we're getting the effects that we wanted based on just going on a description. So each contractor was asked, and they were all willing to install what we asked them to do. Specific, we all said we wanted a Pilot 1.0 blue pen. No, we can trust them all as experts in having the discussion of what we wanted to accomplish to be able to provide their product to fulfill that obligation that we wanted. They did that. We chose the product that we wanted to accomplish the illumination that we wanted, and we went with the lowest quote. And that's how we came to this conclusion.
Very
I
good.
described this multiple times to Mr. Coochball, and he does not agree with it.
So I'm sorry, the total amount, one more time, I missed that.
It's
Approximately.
It's
Didn't have
a
to be
little
exact.
over 18,000 and change.
So right
It's-
around 20K. We'd
It is-
originally
it
budgeted
is-
50,
Correct,
and we're 18 to 20K.
correct.
Okay, very good.
And the other 2 quotes were closer to the $50,000 bid than the $20,000. So it was significantly different. So being good stewards of the taxpayer dollars, I felt this was a good decision and not a hard one to make.
And again, I'd point out one more time, we didn't do anything wrong here. We followed all the rules that needed to be followed in this situation. We just had a vendor that thought that it was not handled properly. So I think
Correct.
we've discussed that and answered those questions. Thank you, Rob. The one thing that I would bring up to council is that we allow, since we're the funding authority, council is, we have the ability to give guidelines to the administration on how to deal with bidding that is between 0 and 50,000. At this point in time, we've told them anything below 50, you can basically do whatever you want. Is that correct, Rob? And you don't have to get it back up, but you can just go buy it from whoever. There doesn't have to be a bidding process. I think given the fact that in this case, at least, it was a significant amount of money, 20,000 or 18,000 and change, I think is a significant amount of funds of public dollars being spent that council should take some time and consider putting some guidelines in so that the administration has something to follow with between 0 and 50K. What those are exactly, I don't have something specifically for you at this point in time. Haven't thought that through, but I think there should be a little bit more accountability when we look at these dollar values. Maybe it's for anything over $20,000. We need to do more of a formal bidding process such that we won't run into this situation again. Just something to consider, and when I have a more solid proposal, I'll bring that back to council at that point in time for your consideration.
Any other questions or comments? Letter to be filed, or letters to be filed.
Letter from City Auditor Stashak regarding revenue estimates for fiscal year 2023. He asked that this be read.
Mr. Russell,
Make a motion to have the letter read into the minutes.
second Mr. Hellman. All those in favor of having the letter read, say aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. Please read the letter into the record. Thank you.
Ohio clearly defines a budgetary process which includes the requirement that municipalities prepare an annual tax budget by July 20th. The County Budget Commission has not required the filing of a complete tax budget for many years and requires the City of Findlay only to provide the attached estimated revenues for submission to the Budget Commission for the next fiscal year. In order to meet the statutory requirements for the distribution of local government money, this document should now be formally accepted by council so it can then be filed with the county auditor by no later than July 20. A motion for acceptance of the revenue estimates will be needed. As required by statute, the council clerk scheduled a public hearing before this meeting, notice of which was published 10 days before the hearing. The document has been available for public inspection in my office since July 7th of this year.
Mr. Wilson.
Jim, you had mentioned that there's very little difference in this document versus last year, just some adjustment of numbers that are relatively minor in the big scheme of things. Is that correct?
Yes, this is a statutory process that for a large portion of it is more just kind of a function we go through. It's more important for smaller entities like townships and whatnot so they can get handles on things. But the two areas I did look at is you have had a significant windfall into your business net profits tax over the last 2 years. As a matter of fact, since I proposed the last piece of legislation in adjusting the income tax, I think our income tax administrator, Mary, has raised her projection another $2 million. So we're looking at a lot of money coming in there. So that is lower for next year on this sheet. And then also there's been an adjustment to Jet A fuel sales, so consumable sales at the airport. Other than that, your department heads through council approving this process basically do their second year budget when they do the budget in the fall. So we look at those numbers and I use those and rely on those heavily for this document. Other than that, we'll look at them very, very closely in the fall when we prepare for next year. And then I file a formal adjustment to this document by the end of January next year.
Very good.
Any other questions or comments? Mr. Wilson.
I make a motion to approve, to accept the revenue estimates.
Second, Mr. Greeno. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. They are accepted. Committee reports.
The Planning and Zoning Committee, to whom is referred a request from Lori Reiser to vacate a portion of the north-south alley from Elm Street to the alley south bounded between lots 1900 and 1901 in the Schwartz and Firmus addition. We recommend the city grant a revocable right-of-way permit instead of vacating the alley.
Mr. Russell.
Move for adoption of the committee report.
Second, Mr. Baumann. Discussion. Mr. Russell.
Just a real quick point, city planning approved the vacation of the alley, but the planning and zoning committee didn't think that that was the appropriate way to handle the situation. In old neighborhoods, alleys have purposes, and vacating them should only be done as a last resort. We thought that the better way to handle this was, as we recommended, a revocable right-of-way permit. In essence, we are the citizen in this case built a fence that was into the alley. It's a very unique situation, and she actually replaced a fence that had been decades old, which was also in the alley. You know, who knew? And so we just, this is the course of action. So you have two different bodies saying two different things. In this case, this would take precedence, and that's how the situation would be resolved.
Any other questions or comments? All those in favor of the committee report say aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. The committee report is accepted.
Planning and Zoning Committee, to whom is referred a request from Darren Karcher on behalf of C&D Stony Tavern Ltd. to rezone 909 Broad Avenue from R3 small lot residential to C1 local commercial. We recommend approval as requested.
Mr. Russell.
Move for adoption of the committee
Second,
report.
Mr. Hellman. Any questions or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor of the committee report say aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. The committee report is accepted.
Planning and Zoning Committee met on July 14th, 2022 to allow for annexation discussions. We recommend to continue to work on the annexation proposal.
Mr. Russell.
Move for adoption of the committee report.
Second, Mr. Hellman. Discussion. Hearing none, all those in favor of the committee report say aye. Any opposed, nay. The committee report is accepted.
The Planning and Zoning Committee met on July 14th, 2022 to discuss Plan Unit Development Zoning Code. We recommend to continue the development of the proposed Plan Unit Development Ordinance.
Mr. Russell.
Move for adoption of the committee report.
Second, Mr. Baumann. Discussion. Hearing none, all those in favor of acceptance of the committee report say aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. The committee report is accepted. Legislation. We move down to ordinances.
Table. Let me get my third reading for ordinance 2022-55 and ordinance appropriating funds and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Hellman.
Move to approve ordinance 2022-055.
Second, Mr. Greeno. Questions or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor of ordinance 2022-055 say aye if your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Bowman?
Aye.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer? Aye. Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
Mr. Weisner? Oh, boy. Mr. Wobser?
Aye.
And Mr. Bowman. I've already said that. Boy, I'm way off.
Did we get everybody?
More than once.
Sometimes twice.
The ordinance is adopted.
We tabled 59. So second reading for 2022-61, an ordinance vacating a certain portion of Cherry Street, hereinafter referred to as the 332 and 336 Cherry Street vacation in the city of Findlay, Ohio. Second reading for ordinance 2022-64, an ordinance authorizing the mayor, service safety director, and/or city engineer of the city of Findlay, Ohio, to enter into a contract with Klaus Construction Corporation for the design phase of the Strict Center project and declaring an emergency. First reading for ordinance 2022-66, an ordinance appropriating and transferring funds and declaring an emergency. First reading for ordinance 2022-67, an ordinance appropriating and transferring funds and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Russell.
For the reasons that Jeremy stated earlier, I would move that the council statutory rules be suspended and this ordinance be given its second and third reading.
Second, Mr. Baumann. All those in favor of suspending the rules, say aye after your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer. Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki.
Aye.
Mr. Wobser.
Aye.
Mr. Bowman.
Aye.
The rules of council have been suspended, and the clerk will give the ordinance its second and third reading.
Ordinance 2022-67. Ordinance 2022-67.
Mr. Wobser.
Make a motion to approve?
Second, Mr. Greeno. Discussion. Hearing none. All those in favor of the ordinance, say aye after your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer.
Aye.
Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki.
Aye.
Mr. Wobser.
Aye.
Mr. Bowman.
Aye.
And Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted.
First reading for ordinance 2022-68, an ordinance appropriating and transferring funds and declaring an emergency. First reading for ordinance 2022-69, an ordinance appropriating funds and declaring an emergency. First reading for ordinance 2022-70, an ordinance authorizing the mayor, service safety director, and/or city engineer of the city of Findlay, Ohio, to enter into a contract or contracts with Mosier Construction Incorporated for the Water Pollution Control Center rehabilitation of clarifiers 3, 4, and 5 at the Water Pollution Control Plant, project number 356-01300, appropriating and transferring funds and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Russell.
Jeremy, we had talked earlier today about this, and you kind of had a desire to get this going, $600,000. Walk us, just give a quick summary of where this project is, important timelines, et cetera, and if you really think this is something we should be considering tonight, or give it to August 2 or August 16.
So I think it should be considered tonight. One of the thing is with the timing of this project. So with this as clarifier 3, 4, and 5, this is with our sewer plant. This will be a rehab project, so fix any concrete that is spalling or cracked or anything like that, and then also putting an epoxy liner on that. Our contractor is ready to go. They can start this, but this type of work has to be done during the dry months because when it is a wet season, if we get a large flow coming into that, we have to use those clarifiers for that excess flow that's coming in. So if we don't have those, then we're going to be more, we're going to have more CSO overflows, SSO overflows, and stuff like that. So we cannot have those type events. So we need to make sure that we get this done during the dry seasons.
So do they do them one at a time?
They will probably be doing these one at a time, so that way we don't take all three of them out at once, and just in case we get a 2-inch rain, we can't take that chance. But we will be able, if we can start in August here, we will be able to get this done before the wet season.
Mr. Wobson.
Jeremy, the total amount of this is 600,000, is that correct? What Councilman Russell said?
Correct.
So, and if we waited until August 2nd on this, so then our next meeting, give the city at least a week or so to look at this, you'd still be okay on your timeline?
It would be, I mean, we're right now kind of pushing it. I mean, we'll make sure we get it done, but it's just, it's going to put more stress on the contractor.
Thank you.
Mr. Hellman.
Can you clarify for me one thing? Is this due to the fact that there are combined sewers, sanitary and storm going in there?
This project, for that extra flow coming in?
Yeah, when you talked about.
Well, not just saying combined sewers, it's also any kind of infiltration or anything like that. But if there are combined sewers that we don't know about or we haven't identified, when that rains, we're going to get all that flow coming into the sewer plant. So we're treating clean water. So it's not saying this is just because of CSOs. We need to get these done because of the H2S that's in the sewer and all that kind of stuff. So it destroys the concrete. But when we do see heavy rains, all that flow, if there are any kind of infiltration from rainwater or anything like that, we see that coming to the plant. So, just to give you an idea, we normally operate at 11 million gallons a day. When we see a heavy rain, we're up to 40 million gallons a day. So that's kind of what the long-term control plan is as well, to get some of that stuff out of there.
Okay.
Mr. Greeno.
I agree with Jeff on this. I mean, maybe it's best to let the citizens know about this for a couple weeks, but this is something that's going to have to be done anyways. So I'm going to make a motion to go ahead and have this give its second and third readings also tonight.
And this was part of the capital plan. I think it's been on there for 2 years running now.
Second, Mr. Hellman. All those in favor of suspending the rules on this ordinance, say aye if your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Niemeyer,
Aye.
Mr. Palmer,
Aye.
Mr. Russell,
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki, Mr. Wobser,
Nay.
Mr. Bowman,
Aye.
Mr. Greeno,
Aye.
and Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
The rules of council have been suspended, and the clerk will give the ordinance its second and third reading.
Ordinance 2022-70, ordinance 2022-70.
Mr. Greeno.
Move for adoption of ordinance 2022-070.
Second, Mr. Hellman. All those in
Re-
favor,
Real quick, are you sure? Because we had 7. I thought, I don't have my notes in front of me. I'm sorry.
suspend the rules.
7 of 9.
It's, if there's 8 members present, it takes 6. Nope, I'm sorry.
Take 7.
Nope, I'm sorry. If there's 8 members, it takes 8. You're correct.
So it's not suspended.
So it's not suspended.
My mistake.
Okay.
Mr. Wobser.
I'd like to make a motion to reconsider this legislation and reconsider Councilman Greeno's motion to suspend.
Okay. Or just, I think if you're going to change your vote, I think you just say you want to change your vote, and then I don't know if we have to go through all that mumbo jumbo.
We haven't voted to adopt yet. Is that what you mean?
That's my interpretation.
Well, we haven't voted because it's not suspended yet.
Okay.
I would like to change my
there's-
vote on that, given the fact that we, the suspension move can't go through unless we have 7 total. 8 total, excuse me.
All of you.
Everybody has to vote in
Okay.
favor.
So for the record, Mr. Wobser is voting
Aye.
aye. That makes the vote
For suspended.
8-0, and the rules are suspended. With that in mind, all those in favor of the ordinance, say aye if your name is
She
called.
needs to give it her second and third reading.
True that.
I'm sorry.
I haven't given the readings yet.
Come on, hurry up.
Sheesh. Ordinance 2022.
Did you give it second and third reading?
I haven't had a chance. Ordinance 2022-70, ordinance 2022-70.
Okay, the ordinance has been given its second and third reading. All those in make a motion, Mr. Greeno.
I'd like to make a motion that ordinance number 2022-070 be adopted.
Second, Mr. Russell. Discussion. Hearing none. All those in favor of the ordinance, say aye if your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Russell,
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki. Mr. Wobser.
Aye.
Mr. Bowman.
Aye.
Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer. And Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted, and I promise to do better the next time.
No coffee. No coffee at a time.
Monkey wrenches and I do not mix.
First reading for ordinance 2022-71, an ordinance appropriating and transferring funds and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Russell.
Move that council statutory rules be suspended and replacement ordinance 2022-071 be given its second and third reading.
Second, Mr. Palmer. All those in favor of suspension of the rules, say aye if your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Ms. Warnicki. Mr. Wobser.
Aye.
Mr. Bowman.
Aye.
Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer. Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
The rules of council have been suspended, and the clerk will give the ordinance its second and third reading.
Ordinance 2022-71, ordinance 2022-71.
Mr. Palmer.
Move for adoption of ordinance number 2022-071.
Second, Mr. Wobser. Discussion. Mr. Hellman.
Yeah, I've got a quick question, I guess, on this. What's the reason for expediting this?
So right now, our GIS system is, I mean, we have a system, but it's very bare bones. We use this daily within engineering, and we have so many features on that that are not up to speed that everyone could use. One would be, you know, fire, like we talked about, where they could use it to find hydrants, they could find it, catch basins, stuff like that. We've been talking with a consultant. We have one ready on board. I'd like to get this moving up as soon as possible, so that way we can get this upgraded before the end of the year to see what kind of system or what kind of features we want to move into next with that growth. And this isn't a couple week process. This is going to be a 4 to 5 month process, possibly, to get this upgraded with all our plans and stuff in it.
Mayor Murin.
Okay. Thank you.
Just to build upon what Jeremy said, we've been talking about this for a couple of years. We'd like to have this prepared going into budget season, because one of the things we'd like to start doing is we have a spreadsheet currently that shows the road ratings and different conditions of them, which we use internally to kind of distinguish some of the key areas that we want to complete projects in. And we think that having this as a visual resource for you all, being able to overlay where the storm sewers are, where all these different aspects are, will be a really good resource for you all. And then some of the features we hopefully will be able to down the road use for the public as well. If you recall, a couple years ago, we started putting our capital plan so people could look at what projects were planned in the upcoming years for their neighborhood. So I think it's a really valuable tool, something we've been talking about, and we're finally able to get it going and want to do so.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions? The rule, no, where are we? Hearing no other questions, all those in favor of the ordinance say aye after your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Wobser?
Aye.
Mr. Bowman?
Aye.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer? Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki?
The ordinance is adopted.
First reading for ordinance 2022-72, an ordinance appropriating and transferring funds and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Russell?
Seeing as though Judge Bishop sent us a letter concerning this, and this is really the court's money that we are moving from one fund to another, and their desire to get moving on the cask, I motion that council statutory rules be suspended and this ordinance be given its second and third reading.
Second, Mr. Baumann. All those in favor of suspension of the rules say aye after your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Ballman?
Aye.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer? Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki? And Mr. Wobser?
Aye.
Rules of council have been suspended, and the clerk will give the ordinance its second and third reading.
Ordinance 2022-72, ordinance 2022-72.
Mr. Palmer.
Move for adoption of ordinance number 2022-072.
Second, Ms. Warnicki. Discussion? Hearing none.
Was that Mr. Greeno?
I'm sorry.
I thought he raised his hand. I'm sorry.
Hearing none. All those in favor of the ordinance say aye after your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Aye.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki? Mr. Wobser?
Aye.
Mr. Bowman?
Aye.
Ordinance is adopted.
First reading for ordinance 2022-73, an ordinance appropriating funds and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Russell.
As is council standard process, it seems to be when we get grant funding, we like to put it to work ASAP, and therefore I'd make a motion that council statutory rules be suspended and this ordinance be given its second and third reading.
Second, Mr. Greeno. All those in favor of suspension of the rules say aye after your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Aye.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki? Mr. Wobser?
Aye.
Mr. Bowman?
Aye.
And Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
The rules of council have been suspended, and the clerk will give the ordinance its second and third reading.
Ordinance 2022-73, ordinance 2022-73.
Mr. Greeno.
Move for adoption of ordinance 2022-073.
Second, Mr. Baumann. Discussion. Hearing none. All those in favor of the ordinance say aye after your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Niemeyer.
Aye.
Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki. Aye. Mr. Wobser.
Aye.
Mr. Bowman.
Aye.
Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
And Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted.
First reading for ordinance 2022-74. An ordinance amending Chapter 1100 et sec of the codified ordinances of the city of Findlay, Ohio, known as the zoning code, by rezoning the following described property referred to as 909 Broad Avenue rezone, which previously was zoned R3 small lot residential to C1 local commercial. First reading for ordinance 2022-75. An ordinance authorizing the mayor of the city of Findlay, Ohio to sign any applicable grant agreement or agreements or related documents for the Findlay Hancock County Community Foundation Grant Program, the Madeline Thomas Schneider Fund, appropriating funds thereto, and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Russell?
In a similar vein, when somebody wants to give us money and we need to sign some paperwork in order to accept it, I think it should be our standard practice to move those along too. So I would make a motion that council's rules be suspended, statutory rules be suspended, and ordinance 2022-075 be given its second and third reading.
Second, Mr. Hellman. All those in favor of suspension of the rules, say aye after your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki. Aye. Mr. Wobser.
Aye.
Mr. Bowman.
Aye.
Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
And Mr. Niemeyer.
Aye.
The rules of council have been suspended, and the clerk will give the ordinance its second and third reading.
Ordinance 2022-75. Ordinance 2022-75.
Mr. Wobser.
Make a motion to approve ordinance 2022-75.
Second, Mr. Greeno. Discussion. Hearing none. All those in favor of the ordinance, say aye after your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki. Aye. Mr. Wobser.
Aye.
Mr. Bowman.
Aye.
Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer. Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted. Old business. Mr. Wobser.
I'd like to make a motion to lift resolution 18-2022 from the table.
Second, Mr. Palmer. All those in favor of lifting resolution 18-2022, say aye after your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Bowman.
Aye.
Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer. Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki. And Mr. Wobser.
Aye.
The resolution is lifted from the table. Mr. Wobser.
This resolution was the topic of conversation at Appropriations Committee. Prior to this meeting, you'll be receiving the recommendations from the Appropriations Committee in your next packet on August 2nd. I wanted to lift this resolution from the table so that it can get its second reading. It's had one reading. We could approve, get its second reading today. Therefore, we would have the committee recommendation on the second, and then we could vote on it also on the same evening. So with that, I would make a motion that this resolution get its second reading. Is that possible, Mr.? It's lifted, that's correct.
Yeah, there's no motion needed. And that's been lifted, so we just give it its second reading.
Resolution 18-2022, Resolution 18-2022.
Just
Yeah,
once.
you
She only
need to
did that
do it
once. That's right. So it's got its second reading.
So by reading it, you should read the narrative behind it.
Really confused. A resolution adopting a minimum reserve balance policy as promulgated by the city auditor's office and repealing all resolutions and or parts of resolutions in conflict herewith and declaring an emergency.
So that gives it its second reading. Any other old business? Mr. Station.
I appreciate and want to thank the Appropriations Committee for hearing the presentation and got an opportunity to share a lot of things with you that I know you weren't aware of, and that it was important that at least members of this body became aware of moving forward. In light of my comments at the last meeting, as well as my comments at the very beginning of the Appropriations Committee meeting, I believe it would be prudent to dispose of the second piece of legislation on the table rather than let it linger into discussions that aren't too far off with regard to the ARPA funds. I don't want to see any lingering potential clawbacks or confusion in the future that money was intermingled, particularly in light of the letter that was submitted to this body from the mayor and some other comments that have been made in the last few months. So I certainly understand. I've given you the information. I think you are well positioned to decide in the future what needs to be done with the self-insurance fund, but I do think you need to dispose of this piece of legislation one way or the other.
Jim, just to be sure that I understand what you're asking, is you want us to just, Councilman Russell, what would we do with this to just, it's,
Well, it was tabled after its first reading.
currently on table. And voted down or removed. Okay, so we could lift and then remove.
Is this 2022-59 or resolution?
59.
Okay.
Thank you, and I appreciate that. I think it's a wise move.
Very good, Jim. With that,
Mr. Wobser.
thank you, Mr. President. So with that, I would make a motion to lift that
59.
resolution
It's an ordinance.
ordinance from the table.
Ordinance 2022-059. We have a motion. Second, Mr. Russell. All those in favor of pulling ordinance 2022-059 from the table, say aye if your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Ms. Warnicki? Mr. Wobser?
Aye.
Mr. Bowman?
Aye.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer? Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Mr. Wobser.
Make a motion that we remove ordinance 2022-59 from the agenda,
We have any further consideration?
from further consideration.
Second, Mr. Russell. All those in favor of removing ordinance 2022-059 from any further consideration, say aye if your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Wobser?
Aye.
Mr. Bowman?
Aye.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer? Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki?
The ordinance is removed. Any other old business? New business? Mr. Russell.
Advance notice, planning and zoning, Thursday, August 11th at noon. Noon.
This is just a meeting reminder. Water and sewer meeting is going to be August the 3rd at 4 o'clock, third room conference. And we're discussing water rates, transmitter project, and the Spring Lake update.
Other new business? Mayor Muir.
Just a couple of quick items. One, I know there was a little bit of news out there about the last traffic commission meeting where I put forward the request of reducing the speed on South Main Street from 35 to 25. I just wanted to share a little bit more about that request. Really wanted to bring it forward as a discussion point as we look and talked with PD and streets. We're going to be doing some data collection throughout town at a number of areas where we have complaints of noise and speeding. Additionally, I've asked PD to provide some additional targeted enforcement in some areas to remind folks that speed limits apply and that you need to follow them. So hopefully that will help. We also are looking at getting a device that we may be able to use to collect data about noise levels throughout town. So you may see that we're currently doing some research on what may make sense. So I think that the flashing signs on South Main Street have already proven beneficial. As people were driving in this morning, they seem to be going a little bit slower. So that's good. Additionally, kind of an old/new business item, I just wanted to make you aware I'll be providing more information in the near future. I am currently in discussions again with the Humane Society and the dog warden and local vet clinic around the feral cat issue and what we may be able to do to expedite improvement on that issue. So more information to follow. Next, East Lima Street, there is, it's a terrible condition. We know that. Columbia Gas has finished their work, and we, as Jeremy had mentioned, we are working with Columbia Gas to be able to repave that road and share the cost with Columbia Gas. So we will be coming back probably at the next meeting to get some additional funds to complete that work. Thank you for the discussion on the minimum reserve account today. I thought it was a good discussion, and I appreciate you all tabling it to allow for that discussion. So for those of you that weren't there, I am supportive with moving forward on changing the minimum reserve policy. On the self-insurance, though it was removed from the agenda, there was a couple of items that the auditor brought up that I do plan to do some additional research on so that we have those as discussion points moving forward, and we'll bring those forward when we have that information. The final item I did put out on the city's social media today. The AEP informed us that there will be an outage on Thursday morning in the downtown area. There is a map that was put out on our Twitter and Facebook. AEP also did a robocall to all of the impacted customers. That will be Thursday morning from approximately 5:30 a.m. to 6:30 a.m. So the impacted customers have been notified, but if anyone is interested in seeing the map, that is on our website. And then finally, a shout out to our emergency responders in the city of Findlay, our ERT, HANCO, firefighters, the whole gamut, Findlay Police Department. Once again, we had a bit of a situation this weekend. They're becoming all too common, but they continue to do a great job responding, managing the situation, and getting good outcomes of those incidents. So always impressed when I'm on scene watching them work, and proud to continue to serve with them. Any questions for me?
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Any other new business? Mr. Hellman.
Well, I don't know whether this is new or old, and I hate to be harping on that same subject about tall grass on various people's properties. And I know we had talked about it, I think, about a month ago. And it seems like when it comes up, somebody goes out and kind of mows their lawn, and I'm referring to commercial properties. And again, today, that was about a month or 6 weeks ago. But quite frankly, I think we ought to have a stronger code enforcement. And if we have to charge people for it, and put an extra fee on their tax duplicate. And I can name properties if you'd like me to, but it's an embarrassment to this community.
Mayor?
I think.
Yeah, so
They deserve better.
yeah, so certainly if you see them, please email myself or zoning or report it through our website. That's the best way for us to be notified, send them a notice of, compliant violation. So we have a very laid out process. We send notification via mail. Sometimes we'll try to track down if we have contact information. We'll try to reach out to them and let them know. We will go through a notification process. They have then a window of time to comply. We try to be kind of flexible if we know it's been like really rainy or something. Obviously that really hasn't been a problem recently, but being able to work with them to make sure that they get it in compliance. If folks don't, then we do have a process where we go out and mow, either the city or a contractor mows, and then an assessment is put on their property taxes. And then the process becomes a little more expedited. So that first one takes a little more time. After that, then they have been notified, and we'll continue to kind of go out if they are found to not be in compliance again. So if there are specific properties, sometimes with corporate entities, it's a little more difficult because the property owner may be a corporate office in Columbus, so we try to just go in or call the manager of the local establishment to get them to comply. But if you have issues, as always, as I tell everybody, please send it to us, because our staff is really good at following up and sending out notices, but it is a process that has to be worked through.
All right, thank you.
Other new business? Hearing none, I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Mr. Russell, second Mr. Palmer. All those in favor of adjournment, say aye. Any opposed?
I'll oppose.
We are adjourned.